Afternoon once again to all the participants. I am again giving you a lecture on introduction to threats, vulnerabilities, and countermeasures. And I am Yash Dhingra, as I said just a while back. So I'll quickly start with the presentation. Uh, this presentation is about looking at. I'll be talking about some current trends that have been going on in the cybersecurity domain, and what are the different threats and what are the different vulnerabilities and what countermeasures we are taking and what we can take uh, as layman users for protecting our devices and our data when we are online. So let's start with the very basics. Let's just look at the what is cyber security. So cyber security is the protection of computer systems from theft or damage to their hardware, software, or electronic data. So that is the definition that we can see on Wikipedia, and I think we already are aware of this. But we need to look at why this is important. I think it's very important to understand the importance of such lectures and such having such sessions on cyber security. So what is the reason why we are having these kind of sessions and training programs is because there is an ever increasing reliance on computer system nowadays. So for whatever activities maybe 5 years 10 years back we were doing via analog systems, or maybe we were doing manually, nowadays even those activities are in some way connected to the internet, or at least getting connected to some computer system which is managing that particular activity. So a lot of our reliance that we basically are reliant on computer system for almost everything that we do nowadays. So even our cars are actually nowadays, if you're going to buy a car, then even your car to some extent is fitted with some kind of computer system which is doing some kind of calculations which you are not able to see. For example, when you hit the brakes really hard on your car, you must have heard about this. But there is something called something that actually protects the tires from jamming. So there is a computer system inside which actually programs the brake in such a way that it is applied very linearly, and the effect is not such that the car can actually skid. So even the most basic things which were very mechanical and which were analog are nowadays in some way connected to some computer device. And then an exponential rise in the number of smart devices. So you might have heard of this thing called the Internet of Things, and a lot of very simple dumb devices like your ceiling fan or your air conditioner or your refrigerator, which used to be very basic devices, are nowadays connected to the internet, and you can actually control them remotely. So you must have heard of these smart LED bulbs which can actually connect with Google Assistant or with Alexa, Amazon Alexa, and then you can actually ask the Google Assistant or Amazon Alexa to turn on or off the light bulb. Similarly, there are fans, there are air conditioners, and even cars are actually now connected to the internet. You can actually turn them on remotely, and you can turn on the air conditioning even before you go and sit inside the car. So all these devices, as they are becoming smart devices. In fact, even the phone used to be a dumb device maybe 10 or 12 years back or 15 years back. Now, in itself is like a complete computer system, and you can do almost everything that you can on a desktop or a laptop machine. So, as these devices or as these normal devices around us are actually getting connected to the internet, so in a similar way, the threat or the risk of these devices getting compromised and hacked is also increasing. So you don't want that your phone should be able to be controlled by some remote person or some hacker. So any hacker or any attacker should not be able to actually read the data that is on your device, and they should not be able to control it remotely. And similarly, all your other devices as well. You don't want the LED bulbs inside your house to be able to be controlled by some other hacker who's sitting on in some other part of the world. So the risk is increasing as the number of devices which are online is increasing. And as we are becoming more reliant on these devices, and we are using more and more computing devices, more and more of our personal data is also going online. So maybe 15 or 20 years back, your entire contact list used to be inside a diary. If you remember, we used to maintain a diary which was indexed, and we used to write down all the phone numbers of all the people whom we know, and it used to be kept in some safe location inside our house or in our offices. But now all your contacts are no more on a diary, but they are inside your phone, and your phone is actually connected to the internet. So if your phone is compromised and if your phone is hacked, then basically all your contacts can be leaked. And who you are communicating with, what calls you are making, and what messages you are sending or receiving, all these can actually be compromised. So that's why it's really important for us to take care of our own security and the security of our devices, especially the ones that we are carrying regularly and the ones that have all our personal data on them. So that's why this is important. And then all our money is actually online. So even if you're not using net banking or debit cards or anything, the bank itself is actually transacting online. So all the transactions that actually happen between banks, they are actually happening online. So there is no more cash being exchanged. Whatever transactions are being made, they are being made online, and all these transactions are actually processed on some computer system which is sitting on somewhere inside a data center. So basically, in a nutshell, we can see that almost everything that we do nowadays is actually reliant on some computer system in some way. So what are the goals of cybersecurity? So there are three goals of cybersecurity. Basically, they are called the CIA of cybersecurity in the colloquial terms. And these CIA are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So the first one is protecting the confidentiality. So if you are sending out an email to your friend, then you don't want that anybody should be able to read that email in between. So that is maintaining the confidentiality. Or whatever communications you have had and whatever emails or whatever SMS messages that you have received, you want them to be only visible to you, and nobody else should be able to view those communications. So that is also comes under confidentiality. And that is the first goal, protecting the confidentiality. The second one is maintaining the integrity. So, for example, if you are sending a message to your friend that you want him to transfer 10,000 rupees into your account, you don't want that someone should be able to actually change that message to from 10,000 to 1,000 rupees. So, for example, if there is a hacker who's sitting in between the communication channel, and when you send an email that I need you to transfer 10,000 rupees, a hacker or an attacker, if he or she is able to actually change that communication to please transfer 1,000 rupees into this particular account, then this is basically breaking the integrity of the message. And the last one is called availability. So your net banking account, if you're using, and if you're using debit cards for withdrawing money from your account, you want that these systems should actually be available to you all the time and 24/7. You don't want that if you're trying to access this particular your net banking website to transfer some funds urgently, and the website itself is not available. So that actually breaks the availability clause, and that's what we need to ensure. That's the third goal of cybersecurity, ensuring the availability of the systems. So we'll look at some current trends. These are basically from 2020 onwards, and what kinds of cybersecurity incidents and threats we have seen in the past 1.5 years. This is there have been a large number of attacks on banking infrastructure over the past few years, and some of them I've mentioned here. There was an attack on Cosmos Bank in August 2018, and then there was an attack on City Union Bank. Both of these are Indian banks, which are actually cooperative banks, which do not have a large amount of assets, That's why they're basically their spending on cybersecurity is also less, and they maybe they do not have enough. They did not have enough resources, or they did not have enough. They did not give enough importance to cybersecurity. That's why these attacks happened. And similarly, these waves of attack, this wave of attacks on banking infrastructure actually started from Bangladesh Central Bank in 2016. So we'll briefly look at what happened in the Cosmos Bank attack. And this is a Pune-based cooperative bank. And the attack was actually carried out by cloning thousands of debit cards of this particular bank. And if you are not aware of this, then when you swipe your debit card inside an ATM machine, uh, an attacker, if he has had access to that particular machine, can actually place a skimmer device inside the ATM machine. And when you actually push in your ATM card inside that machine, what happens is that that skimmer device is able to read the magnetic chip of the debit card, and it's able to copy all that information. So after that information is copied, the attackers are able to create cloned debit cards of your debit card, and then these debit cards can actually be swiped somewhere in an ATM machine to actually withdraw cash. So that's what these attackers did. They cloned a large number of debit cards of this particular bank. And then these debit cards were actually swiped in 28 different countries almost at the same time on the same day. And 78 crore rupees in cash was actually withdrawn from this particular bank. So that was the first vector of attack. And the second vector was actually by compromising the Swift gateway of the bank. So Swift gateway is actually a computer system which validates the transactions that are made through cards. So you might have heard of these companies called Visa and MasterCard and RuPay. So whenever you make a transaction via your debit card, it is actually validated by these organizations. And it goes through the bank and through these to this organization, and when they are validated, then basically the transaction goes through. So all these validations and all these communications between the banks and the validating authority actually happens through a Swift gateway. Now if they were able to compromise this particular Swift gateway in such a way that whatever transaction came to this Swift gateway, it was not declined. So automatically all the transactions from the attackers were actually confirmed, and they were executed. So that's how they were able to transfer around 14 crore rupees to a Hong Kong based bank. Now, in the very recent past, around the 1.5 years, you might have also come across a large number of such news reports of data breaches happening. And I think in November or December last year, there was a data breach on Big Basket. So Big Basket is actually a company that delivers groceries and other household items to your house. And some of you might have actually used these and used this service as well. But what happened is that there was some vulnerability in their infrastructure, and the hackers were actually able to compromise their networks, and they were able to get hold of the entire database. So the name of this particular gang is called Shiny Hunters, and they had done this in November or December last year. But they were actually selling this data for around 30 lakh rupees last year. But just yesterday, this news came up, and I've pasted this screenshot from a news item from yesterday, that the Shiny Hunters have actually pasted this data online now, and it is available for free for anybody to download. So if you were a user of Big Basket, basically it's possible that your home address, your phone number, and even other information like your email ID might have actually been compromised, and it might be available online for free for anybody to download. So we have seen a large number of such data breaches. In fact, just a month or maybe 3 or 4 weeks back, there was a cybersecurity breach which was reported on Upstocks, which is a company that deals in stock market trading. And that was also a huge attack. And there was also an attack which was reported on MobiQuick, which is a mobile wallet application. So a large number of these attacks are nowadays taking place, and all the data is actually valuable, and it is actually sold for a large amount of money. Then I'm pretty sure because of the COVID situation, you are still using the Arogya Setu application. And last year, when this was launched in May, immediately in a week or so, we started getting reports of fake Arogya Setu applications, which were especially being targeted on government and defense personnel. And these fake Arogya Setu applications were actually spyware, and they were used for spying on the victim's device. So whatever information on your device is there, it will take all the permission and it will start transferring all that information to the attackers. So this was reported last year. And this is also from last year. TikTok was actually flagged by a quite a few companies and quite a few countries because it was dealing in some malpractices, and it was actually harvesting data from the users. So it was actually flagged, and we'll look at this in more detail. I think we have another session on mobile security tomorrow, so we'll look at this in more detail then. Then there are defacements of websites. So this keeps happening, and this is a very old thing, and this is also currently very common, especially on government websites. So an attacker, if he or she is able to find out some vulnerability in a government or some critical organization's website, then what they will do is they will hack into that website, and they'll place their own image or text on the homepage, so that everybody who visits that website can actually know that this particular website has been hacked. And this is basically done to cause shame to the organization and to demean the name. Other than that, there is no other motive. Then there are ransom emails. So this is a very old and a very simple kind of an attack, where you will get an email inside your inbox which will appear to come from your own account. So for example, if I receive an email from my own account, which says that I am a hacker and I have hacked into your account. I have the login ID and password of your account. And if you don't want me to make public all your communications, then you have to transfer some certain amount of money in terms of bitcoins into my Bitcoin address. So that's what will happen, and they'll warn you that they have some objectionable material against you, which they have recovered from your mail account and by hacking into your system. And if you don't transfer the money, they are going to make all that objectionable material public. So that's what this attack is, and it's a very simple and very common attack which has actually been going on for several years, but we still keep getting reports of this. So what happens is that actually the email is not coming from your own email account. There are several fake email providers on the web. If you just search for anonymous email provider on Google, you will be able to find several hundreds of websites which actually provide this service. So you can send an email to anybody, and they will, when they look at it, it will appear to come from somewhere else. You can pretend to be any other email account while sending an email to another person. Basically, it's like spoofing your from address. So it's totally possible, and it's very easy to do. Then there is something called crypto jacking. So I think in Hariharan sir's presentation in the morning, he was talking about this something called crypto mining. So if an attacker is able to actually hack into a server, then they can actually place a crypto mining tool on the server, and the server's resources will actually be utilized for mining cryptocurrency for the attacker. So what happens here is that you need to compromise multiple servers in order to be able to generate enough income for yourself. But there is another kind of attack called crypto jacking. So in case of crypto jacking, what happens is you don't actually have to place a crypto miner on the server itself. But what you do is you place a small, if you're able to hack into a server, what you do is you place a small 3-line code inside the actual code of the website, And this particular code is actually a crypto mining code. So whenever a user visits this particular website, their CPU resources are being used for mining cryptocurrencies for the attacker. So for example, if there is any website which is actually visited by a large number of users, for example, if it is being visited by thousands of users, then whenever these thousands of users visit this particular website, their CPU usage, resources will be used for mining cryptocurrency. So this actually generates quite a bit of income for the attacker. Then there is ransomware. Pretty sure you've heard of this thing because it is really, really common nowadays. And there will be a malware which will come onto your system. And if by mistake you click on that, or if you execute that particular malware, then it will actually encrypt all the different files that are there on your machine, and it will ask you for ransom before they can actually be decrypted. So again, the ransom is almost always demanded in cryptocurrency because it cannot be traced. Now, by looking at all these current trends, we've talked about something called a vulnerability, which can actually be exploited by an attacker. So let's just understand what a vulnerability is. So basically, a vulnerability is like this image. It's very simple to understand. It's like a hole in a fence. You don't want someone from the outside to be able to cross over to your side, so you build a fence. But if unintentionally you're leaving a hole inside the fence, then basically that becomes a vulnerability. So this is the definition of vulnerability from Wikipedia. A vulnerability is a weakness which can be exploited by an attacker to perform unauthorized action within a computer system. Now, there are different kinds of vulnerabilities. There are three different kinds of vulnerabilities broadly in which they can be categorized. So the first one is called a technology weakness. So technology weakness means it is actually like a software bug or a vulnerability or a weakness which has actually been left behind unintentionally by the vendor or the programmer of that particular software. So for example, like Microsoft Windows, it keeps pushing you security updates. So these updates actually are patches for these technology weaknesses which are there inside the Windows system. So whenever you receive these updates, basically they are trying to patch some kind of weakness or vulnerability which has been unintentionally left behind. Now the onus for fixing these technology weakness actually lies on the software vendor, and the user ideally is not able to do much in this case other than installing all the updates in a timely fashion. So that's the only thing that a user can do in this case. Now the next one is called a configuration weakness, and configuration weakness to some extent is actually both the software vendor and the user is also responsible for this. The reason is that configuration means that you're not configuring the product properly. So now it could be because of your negligence that you're leaving it behind and you're not configuring it properly. And it can also be a problem with the configuration settings itself. For example, most of the Wi-Fi routers that you buy from the market, you'll see that they come with some login ID and password which is set as default on them. And it is not mandatory to actually change that login ID and password. So what most people do is they simply install that router on their premises connected to the internet, and then they are connected to all that router actually connects to all the devices inside the house or inside the office premises. But the credentials have not been changed. So the credentials have been left behind the same. Now, any attacker can actually just Google for those credentials, and if they get access to your router, they'll be able to log in into the router, and you by using the default username and password, and then they can basically change the settings inside. So this is a problem with the settings of the router. It should actually it should not ideally come with default credentials. But even if it is coming with default credentials, it should make it mandatory for the user to change them on the first usage itself. So that is like a problem from the vendor side, and the user should ideally be aware of this thing, that the default password should not be left unchanged. So that's what the user ideally should do. Then the last point is called the last type of weakness is called security policy weakness. And a security policy is actually enforced by an organization in order to protect its assets. So, for example, if it is a security policy by your organization that you need to show your ID card at the security gate, uh, and you cannot enter without that. So that is like a security policy which has been enforced. In a similar way, you'll see that on most websites nowadays, they will enforce that you create a strong password. So that is a very basic security policy which is being enforced by most of the companies nowadays. So that a user is not able to use very simple passwords like password 123 or admin 123, and to make sure that they use complex passwords. So that is like a security policy. Now, if the security policy is not created properly by the organization, then that can actually lead to a lot of different kinds of attacks. So the onus here lies with the organization who is actually creating the security policy. Now, all the different companies which are also software vendors, they actually release vulnerability notes for their softwares. And as and when they are made aware of these different kinds of vulnerabilities, they create the patches for these vulnerabilities, and then they release vulnerability notes on their different websites. So Certain actually tracks these vulnerabilities, and as and when an update is published or any other information regarding any vulnerability in most of the common software vendors like Cisco, Microsoft, Google, and Apple, as and when all these vulnerabilities are released by these software vendors, we actually track them and we post them on our website on the vulnerability notes section. So you can actually go to our website and look at them. Now, these are some best practices and countermeasures to keep in mind what we should do. We should always keep our applications updated. We should keep our operating systems updated, and we should never use no pirated software. I think most of us have some point in time we have used some kind of pirated software. But when you are using a pirated software, it has actually been compromised, or it has actually been modified by an external third party person, and you never know what code they might have actually injected in it. So it's possible that they might have placed some kind of malicious program within that tool, and when you install this tool on your device, you might get the functionality that you are looking for, but it's possible that they might have added some additional fraudulent or malicious functionality which might keep running behind your back, and you don't even know about it. Now, antiviruses can prevent a few kinds of attacks, and it's very important to keep antiviruses on our machines. So this is very briefly how an antivirus works. So an antivirus actually works on the basis of file hashes, and just like a fingerprint can actually be used to identify an entire person, in a similar way, a file hash is like a small 256-bit or 512-bit digest of that entire file, which can actually be used to identify that particular file. So since it is a very small little it takes a small amount of memory, for example, just 256 bits or 512 bits. So a large amount of these hashes can actually be stored within the antivirus program's database. So whenever you execute any new program on your device, whenever you execute a new file, or whenever a new file actually comes onto your machine, the antivirus actually computes the file hash of this file, and then it actually matches it against its own database. So if it actually matches inside its own database, it simply gives you a warning that this particular file is actually malicious and it can actually harm your computer system. So it will not allow you to execute that particular file. That's how an antivirus basically works in a very rudimentary way. Nowadays, most of the antiviruses also analyze the behavior of the malware, and they are able to predict certain kinds of attacks just by looking at the behavior of any particular file. So even if the file hash of that particular file is not known, It's possible that just by looking at the behavior, for example, what all registry entries that particular malware is modifying, what all files it is downloading, what all folders it is accessing. So by looking at all this information from the behavior of a particular file, an antivirus may be able to predict that this is actually a malware and it is trying to harm the system. So that's another technique by which modern antiviruses works. And it's also important to keep your antivirus updated. And there are free antiviruses available which give you most of the basic features. But if you want some advanced features, then you can actually purchase antiviruses. They are not very expensive. Now we have looked at the different kinds of weaknesses that can actually happen or that can actually be present inside the computers or inside software, but we have not actually looked at the biggest weakness in this entire chain. And that weakness is basically us or humans. Now it is offers it still requires a certain level of complexity to actually be able to hack into a computer system, but it's actually very easy to fool people. And all these attacks which actually leverage the human link in the chain and which try to fool people into revealing their own information are called social engineering attacks. So you might have heard of these, and there are different kinds of social engineering attacks, phishing, honey trapping, and then sending out malicious attachments which look like genuine emails. So all these basically utilize the social engineering vector. And social engineering is basically, in a nutshell, it's like a psychological manipulation of people into performing actions by which they divulge their own confidential information. So that is what social engineering is. And we are going to look at some of the techniques in social engineering. I'm pretty sure you guys are aware of some of these attacks, and we're going to very quickly go through this section so that we can take some questions also at the end of the presentation. And so first thing is phishing. I think in my previous lecture as well, we talked about this phishing. And in your other lectures also, some other trainers might have also talked about this. So phishing is basically creating a fake website which looks like the genuine website, and it actually targets the user into giving their login ID and password. So that's what a phishing page mainly is. And the most common attacks that we see nowadays, or we have been seeing since some time, it is basically phishing attacks on the income tax department. And we'll see somewhat and see this in somewhat detail in my next lecture when we talk about mobile security, which is tomorrow. But I'll just give you a small little brief of about it over here. So this is an example of a fraud income tax email, which is supposed to be coming from the income tax department. And it says that you have some income tax which is left and you need to claim the refund for this income tax. And in order to claim this income tax, you need to actually click on some link to go to a website, and then you need to fill up a form. So this is actually a fraudulent website, and it will ask you for all your confidential information. And once you give your all your confidential information, like your bank, basically your net banking credentials and your debit card or credit card numbers, the attackers will be able to will be able to execute transactions from your bank accounts. So this is another example of a phishing page of RBI. So the genuine page is rbi.org.in and the fake page is e-rbi.gov.in. Then this is a phishing page of Paytm, where it is asking for an OTP so that you can complete your KYC for Paytm. And then there are several websites of net banking of almost all banks. So at some point of time, you might have actually come across one of these websites. And when you go to this particular website, it will actually look exactly like the genuine website also, and you may not be able to find out whether it's a genuine website or not unless you look at the address bar. So these are some different kinds of tactics by which phishing attacks can actually be executed. The first one is called compromised web servers. So if you're able to hack into someone else's web server, then you can actually place your own pages on that web server. For example, if you want to create a phishing page of State Bank of India, you can actually hack into some website which has some vulnerability, and then you can add your own page which looks like the SBI net banking page, and you can post it on the put it on some random folder inside the server, and you can then send out the links via email to unsuspecting people who will actually be fooled into giving their net banking credentials to you. So you can see it's an example, notsosecure.com/bankname/login. The actual website here is notsosecure.com. I've only taken this as an example. It could be any website which can actually be compromised, and then the folders can be created, and the login page might be placed over there. So the other one is free web hosting or subdomain services. So if you do not have the technical expertise to actually hack into any third-party website, what you can do is you can create your own free website on some of these free subdomain providers. So for example, one such website is called 000webhost.com. So if you go on to this particular website, they will give you a subdomain for this particular website for free. For example, you might want to create your own domain, example dot 000webhost.com. Or in this case, if you can see www.bank.com.freespace-sitename.com, it could be 000webhost.com. So the actual domain of the website is actually marked in red. So you can see that's the name of the website. But when you look at the address bar, if it says statebankofindia.com.freespace-sitename.com, some of the users might not notice the second part of it. The third kind is by using misleading domain names, by changing one or two letters inside the spelling of the website, you can actually create such pages. And you can also use URL shortening services. So you might have actually come across these websites called Bitly and TinyURL or Cutly. There are several such websites which offer you these URL shortening services. So whenever you want to send someone a huge long URL, instead you can use these URL shortening services and you can send it to them. That's what the basic use is. But nowadays, a lot of hackers actually use their services for hosting their malware and basically hosting their malware onto these kind of onto websites, and then basically sending out the shortened URL to the victim. Then multiple redirections can actually also be used. For example, if you receive a link, you click on it and then it goes to some other website, then that goes to some other website. In a similar way, you can have 3 or 4 redirections before it actually lands up on the actual page. So this can actually be used for fooling users who would not suspect that something wrong is happening. So that is the next kind. And then there are, this is like third, this is for example, this is an example of the third point itself, domain squatting or type squatting as it is called, wherein you'll use some special characters in between the name. So for example, you can see the A in facebook.com is actually not from English. It's an annotated A, and which is actually used in other languages. So these are some best practices about phishing and how to protect yourself from it. So always check the email source, and although I already talked about email spoofing providers, but you can still look at the email headers of that email, and that ways you will be able to find out where that email is actually coming from. Then it's never recommended to actually click on links inside emails directly. You should first hover over the link to find out the actual URL. And once you know what the URL is, only then you can actually right click that, copy the URL and paste it in the address bar so that you can at least look at what website you are visiting. And then you should actually, if you are still not sure, you can actually search for the website on Google. For most common brand names and most common companies, you'll actually come across the genuine website on the first or second result itself. And it is always recommended to type the URL onto the address bar instead of copying pasting it from somewhere, because that ways you may miss some spelling mistake which has been intentionally left behind. Then it is advisable not to fill up forms inside email. So you might get a Google form inside an email, and it might ask you for some information. So it is always advisable not to fill up such forms if you are receiving them inside the email itself. Now the next kind of attack is called the malicious attachment, and this is actually spread by using uh, emails which have some sense of urgency to them, and the email will say that you need to urgently look at this document and take action or something like that, and it will come from your one of your seniors and one of your bosses, and it will have a sense of urgency so that you can actually be tricked into opening that email immediately, and basically that particular document or that particular file will compromise your device. So any kind of file can actually be weaponized. PDFs, executables, doc files, Excel files, zip files, RAR files, any kind of files can actually be weaponized, and some kind of malware can actually be placed inside them. So it's not just exe files which are dangerous, but all these files can also be weaponized, and they can be used as malware on your machine in order to either steal your data or to actually stop it from functioning properly. So the recommendation is not to open email attachments unless you are absolutely sure of the source. So if you know where that attachment is coming from, only then you should open that particular attachment. So this is an example of an email with a malicious attachment. It says, please find attached an urgent message from Joint Secretary on the above mentioned subject. So if you receive an email from the Joint Secretary, you're bound to look at it urgently. And that's what most people do. They open these kind of urgent emails, and that is actually that compromise the entire system. See, so the next one is called honey trapping. Honey trapping basically means you'll get a friend request or connect request on one of your social media accounts, for example, on Facebook or Instagram or something like that. And you actually, if you accept their request, then they'll start chatting with you for some time. And after 1 or 2 months of gaining your trust, they will ask you to install some kind of tool on your machine, which will actually start stealing your data. So this has actually happened several times with a lot of defense personnel, and that's why it is very important for everyone to know about these kind of emails, and you're not supposed to touch them. So all these honey trapping actually is used for basically stealing sensitive information from the victim. And I think we are done with this section, so we'll move on to the next section. I'll just go through the chat section to see if there are any questions. I don't see any questions over there. If you have any questions, you can actually post them in the Q&A box or in the chat box, and we can take them towards the end of the session. So this is actually the last section, and this has some very basic practices for staying safe on the web. And this has some very basic tactics by which we can actually, as layman users, we can stay safe while browsing the internet and while installing programs from the internet. So the first thing that you can actually do is you can actually Google your own name. Just put your own name inside double quotes and just search your own name, and you'll be able to find out what all information you have unintentionally shared online, and what all basically you want to find out what all such information is actually available publicly on Google itself. So double quotes, if you put double quotes around your name, basically it will give you the exact string inside the results. For example, if your name is Rakesh Kumar, and if you simply search for Rakesh Kumar on Google, it will show you results for Rakesh and for Kumar as well, for separately as well. So that's what we don't want. We want that it should only show results for Rakesh Kumar. and you can simply put double quotes inside the Google search string and you'll get the exact results from that. So this way you'll be able to find out what all information you have unintentionally shared publicly through your social media accounts or from somewhere else. And it is important to look inside the images tab, because if you're using Facebook or Instagram, it's possible that you might have posted some images or unintentionally on your profile which you didn't want to. And it's through this Google search itself you'll be able to find out, and then you can actually remove those images from the web. So evaluating private information that should not be visible. So that's what we need to do. We need to evaluate what information should be public and what information ideally should not be public. Then going through all your social media profiles, just check if you have unintentionally shared any personally identifiable information, or PII as we say. So this is basically confidential information about you which can actually be used to identify you. So we don't want any of our PII to be available online. And check your friend list on your social media profiles and see if you have added any random persons or any unknown persons on your social media profile. Then you should immediately go and remove them. Then you should also recheck the security settings inside your social media profile. Facebook has an extensive list of basically security settings, and you should go through them properly in order to secure your account. And in a similarly, Instagram, Google, all these have their own security settings, and you should just go through them to make sure that you are using the most optimal level which is suited for you. So these are some other things to keep in mind. Every bit of data is important. If you think your phone number you can give off online freely, then that's a mistake, because your Paytm account and several other accounts are actually linked with your phone number directly. So you don't want your phone number to actually be available publicly, and no one should be able to misuse your phone number for creating fake accounts or for accessing any of your accounts. So then avoiding signing in on untrusted systems. You should make sure that you sign in only on trusted machines at your home or in your office. And you should use incognito mode as far as possible to make sure that none of your accounts remain logged in. So if you use the incognito mode, then basically when you close that browser window, your account is automatically signed out. Then disabling autoplay for USB drives. This is very important, and you should scan your USB device with an antivirus before using it, especially on Windows. And you should use multiple online identities for different purposes. So this is very important. You should have separate email IDs for your office work and for your personal communication, and you should not use your personal email ID for any of your official communications, and vice versa. So this is very important because as an example, if your personal email ID is compromised, if you're using any of your official computer, if you're actually communicating with your official contacts through your personal email ID, then if your personal email ID is compromised, even your official secret communications may actually come into risk. So it's very important to maintain different identities for different purposes. Now, this is something very basic and something that anybody can look at. So whenever you are signing in onto any website, you should make sure that it is actually an HTTPS website. And if that is the case, then the browser itself will tell you that the website is secure, and it will give you a green icon, a green lock icon on the side. If it is actually an HTTP website, then it is actually risky to log in onto such website. The reason is that when the website is actually working on HTTP, then whenever you sign in onto any such website, your login credentials, basically your username and password, is actually sent to the server on the internet unencrypted. So anybody, if they are able to capture that particular packet and if they are able to read it, then they'll directly be able to look at your login credentials. So that is not advisable, and ideally your login credentials should be sent encrypted across the network. So that happens in case of HTTPS, and you can see that this is how the browser looks when you are opening an HTTPS website. So there are several links and several such clickbait links which you might come across on the internet, which will have such kind of sensational news, and they will entice you into actually clicking on it. But in turn, it's possible that they might steal a lot of your information. So it's advisable not to click on such links. And this is also an example of that itself. This is a form which is saying that you can meet some celebrity by filling this form. So you should never fill up any of your confidential details in such links. So these are some final countermeasures and the things that you can actually keep in mind in order to keep secure. You should use random and unique passwords for all your accounts, and you should use uppercase, lowercase letters and numbers and characters inside your password to make it as secure as possible. And if you find it difficult to remember all your different passwords, then you can actually use the password manager like LastPass, OnePass, or some others. These are paid services, and you just need to remember one password, and the other password are actually supplied when you punch in your master password onto that particular tool. Then all your passwords should be changed at least once a year. This is also a very basic recommendation. I think most of you would have already heard of this. And if it is possible, you should always enable two-factor authentication. So for example, if you're using login ID and password, then that is a one-factor authentication. But if you're receiving an OTP to sign in into your account, then that is actually a two-factor authentication. And as far as possible, you should always enable this in all your accounts. So most of the email accounts also nowadays provide this two-factor authentication functionality, and you can actually go inside the settings and enable that. So that's it from the presentation. I am done with the presentation part. Now, if we have any questions, we can take them. Naresh sir, do we have any questions inside the Q&A box? Naresh sir, am I audible?
Yes, sir, Naresh here.
Yeah, Naresh sir, do we have any questions? I am done with the presentation.
No questions, sir, as of now.
Okay.
We'll
Okay.
take lunch break.
Okay, sir.
Okay, sir. Thank you.